Because we've now somehow gone beyond the threshold of death, we're able to study what happens to mind and consciousness when the brain is potentially shut down.
Dr. Sam Parnia has pored over thousands of stories of near-death experiences. He is trying to explain what happens between life and death. Is there a soul?
We can somehow answer this age-old question that people have had for millennia, which is it the brain cells that are producing your consciousness, or is it some other process that we don't understand yet?
He is studying cardiac arrest patients who claim to remember leaving their bodies and witnessing what was going on below. He places pictures high up in the corners of hospital rooms where they cannot be seen by anyone unless they physically leave their body and hover above the scene.
The images vary. What we can then do is simply put an image on this side that's only visible if you're looking from the ceiling down.
But if a brain-dead person is then revived and has memories of being somewhere after clinical death, how can you explain it?
That's why you can't explain away people's experiences as being a dream, because you can't dream or have a hallucination if you're flatlined on your brain. In order for you to hallucinate, you have to have a functioning brain.
Dr. Sam Parnia is one of the world's leading experts on the study of death and these near-death experiences. His new book is called Erasing Death. Dr. Parnia, good morning. It's good to see you.
Good morning. Good to be here.
Lots to talk about in this book. Let's pick it up right there, though, with these near-death experiences. You well know that you have many colleagues in the scientific community who doubt this, who they say this is basically hallucinations that are brought on by lack of oxygen to the brain. As I understand it, you're planning to study this. Tell me about, I've heard about one where you want to actually place some things high up in a hospital room to see if that out-of-body experience is real?
Well, you see, I'm an intensive care physician. My goal is to bring people back to life. That's my aim. But in order to do that, we have to study what happens after death. And an inadvertent consequence of this, the flip side of the coin, is that we've learned about what people experience after death. So that's why we know that when people die, their consciousness is not annihilated, and that there are these experiences.
Yeah. Well, it will be interesting to see the results of that study.
I want to come back to the question of out-of-body experiences because, Sam, I know you have been the director of a study called the AWARE study, which is actually trying to check on this in some scientific way to see if there's a way to prove that the mind is more than just brain function. Do you want to tell us about your study?
Not right now. I just wanted to actually, before we can do that, I just need to touch back on, it's important for everyone to understand what we're talking about. I deal with cardiac arrests every week. I've resuscitated hundreds, if not more, of patients, and it's my bread and butter. It's what I do for a living. And the important thing which Peter was alluding to is to understand that actually while there are many things that make people become very sick, but with cardiac arrest, it's understood very well because we have to understand the physiology in order to be able to bring people back and preserve their brain. So as Kevin mentioned, when you have, at the beginning, when blood flow to the brain gets beyond a certain threshold, then the brain does not function. Now when someone's heart stops, immediately, when there is no pumping of the heart, there is no blood, zero blood getting into the brain. And immediately, a patient will develop fixed and dilated pupils. They lose all of their brainstem reflexes, which is why we can put a tube into their airway and they don't gag. And their brain stops functioning completely within seconds. Now, when we do resuscitation, with the best of efforts that we make, we can only get a little bit of blood, 5% of the blood that the person has ordinarily into the brain. And that's why throughout the entire period of resuscitation, the brain remains flatlined. And the pupils remain fixed and dilated. The brainstem does not function. The only cases where that may be an exception is if we have transiently restarted the heart and we lose it again. But when the heart doesn't beat, that's the case. Now, interestingly, to go to your question of consciousness, what we have is that we have many thousands, if not millions of people now who are reporting these incredible experiences from all over the world, many of whom have described our doctors, our nurses, conversations of what was going on, but you cannot have a functioning cortex in this time. It's not possible. So we're left with a paradox. So this led us to put together a more definitive study, which we call AWARE, Awareness During Resuscitation, to try to iron out some of these issues. And part of that was to try to study the quality of oxygen getting into the brain and hopefully improve outcomes for our patients so they don't end up brain damage. And part of it was also to try to study these recollections that people have. Now, our study has been analyzed, and we will be releasing the results soon. But I can just give a little snippet, if I may, just because everyone asks us. And what we have found, and this is not just my interpretation, these are experts. We have at least 20 experts from neurology to psychiatry to various fields in neuroscience to emergency medicine who have conferred the findings that essentially our data suggests that these so-called out-of-body experiences, at least when they occur in the cardiac arrest setting, which is why I call them visual awareness, cannot be defined as a hallucination. They cannot be defined as a hallucination. They are not consistent with what we call a hallucination.
I have an impolite question to ask each of you. It's one of the pleasures of having my job here is I get to ask you pointed questions. And so here's the question. And what I'm looking for here is a very simple answer, a yes, a no, or a maybe. Your best guess, does consciousness exist after death? Sam?
Okay. So here we are. We just said that.
Your best guess. We're speculating.
We don't know exactly what you mean by death when it's become permanent and stuff. But I would say that the way that we've traditionally perceived death, the way that philosophers have written about it, poets have written about it, movies show it, etc., that after a person reaches that point, yes, consciousness continues at least for tens of minutes, if not hours of time. And beyond that, we simply cannot measure or study it at this point. Maybe in 50 years we can. Was that short enough? Like I said, you asked a $1 million question in 5 seconds.
Let's say one day you met a person who has achieved enlightenment, and you could ask this person 3 questions, any questions you want. What would they be? Mine would probably be, what is the meaning of life? Why is Kim Kardashian a celebrity? What happens after you die? So we all die. That's something we all have in common. I mean, as soon as you're born, the countdown begins. If you think about it, birthdays, the day you celebrate and eat cake, they're just markers to your eventual death. Of course, different religions and beliefs talk about what happens after you die, and the options are basically heaven, hell, reincarnation, or you're just dead. Usually science, which if you think about it, is itself a belief system, you just die, nothing else happens, you're in the ground and you're warm food. But now a scientific study supports the notion that there may actually be life after death. Researchers at the University of Southampton conducted the largest ever medical study into near-death and out-of-body experiences, and has discovered that some awareness may continue even after the brain has shut down. Researchers spent 4 years examining more than 2,000 people who suffered cardiac arrest at 15 hospitals in the UK, US, and Austria, and they found that nearly 40% of people who survived described some kind of awareness during the time when they were clinically dead before their hearts were restarted. One man even recalled leaving his body entirely and watching his resuscitation from the corner of the room. Despite being unconscious and dead for 3 minutes, the 57-year-old social worker from Southampton recounted the actions of the nursing staff in detail and described the sound of the machines. Dr. Sam Parnia of the State University of New York, who led the study, says that we know the brain can't function when the heart has stopped beating, but in this case, conscious awareness appears to have continued for up to 3 minutes into the period when the heart wasn't beating, even though the brain typically shuts down within 20 to 30 seconds after the heart has stopped. The man described everything that had happened in the room, but importantly, he heard 2 bleeps from a machine that makes a noise at 3-minute intervals, so we could time how long the experience lasted for. He seems very credible, and everything that he said had happened to him had actually happened. Of the 2,060 cardiac arrest patients studied, 330 survived, and of 140 surveyed, 39% said they had experienced some kind of awareness while being resuscitated. Although many could not recall specific details, some themes emerged. 1 in 5 said they had felt an unusual sense of peacefulness, while nearly 1/3 said time had slowed down or speeded up. Some recalled seeing a bright light, a golden flash, or the sun shining. Others recounted feelings of fear or drowning or being dragged through deep water. 13% said they had felt separated from their bodies, and the same number said their senses had been heightened. Dr. Parnia believes many more people may have experiences when they are close to death, but drugs or sedatives used in the process of resuscitation may stop them from remembering.